Lucy Letby. She could be Britain's worst serial child killer, no doubt, actually. And today, Lucy Letby will be sentenced at Manchester Crown Court, but it's very unlikely now that she'll be there to actually hear it.
Well, that's despite the Prime Minister pledging more than a year ago to do everything possible to force offenders to be there as justice is served. And we're joined now by Minister for Children and Families, Claire Coutinho. Claire, I am sure there's so much about this case that has filled you with horror, as it is you are Minister for Children and Families. But for those families who want to have their victim statements heard by the perpetrator of their suffering, why isn't it that we haven't got the power to bring Lucy Letby to court to hear it?
I mean, as you say, Kate, it's been absolutely sickening, these crimes. I think it's some of the most appalling crimes I've heard of in my entire lifetime. We do have, to your point, there is a law in place which can compel people to come and adds 2 years to their custodial sentence if they don't. However, it does sound like further changes are needed. And I know that the Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, has talked about how committed he is to doing this as soon as he can, because it is that...
Can I just cut in there? Sorry, but it's a really important point. I'm glad you said that, that there is already existing legislation which allows any judge to ask any criminal to be brought by force if necessary, reasonable force, to court. So if that provision exists, why is it not being exercised this very morning in this country to get Lucy Letby back into court, to hear her punishment and to hear what she's done to those parents? Why can't it be enacted?
Well, look, I'm not a Justice Minister, but my understanding is that if you don't turn up, it can add extra time, 2 years, to your custodial sentence.
Yeah, but if she's getting
life,
that makes no difference, does it? I mean, if she's never coming out of jail, which is almost certainly going to be the sentence, then you can't add 2 years to a maximum sentence, can you?
That's exactly my point. So I think, you know, as I've said, Alex Chalk has said that there's more that needs to be done to put the law in place to make sure that perpetrators do have to go to court and face victims, and so that victims can have that moment of telling them what they've done to them and their families, which is really, I think, really important part of the justice system.
What if a defendant or a convicted criminal dragged back against their will under the changes in the law, which you say are going to follow on, I think, November the 7th in the King's Speech? What if they act up? What if when they get into court, they start abusing the court, abusing the judge, abusing, let's say, a rapist starts abusing the victim? It kind of backfires as a policy, doesn't it?
Well, these are the exact kind of practicalities that we need to look into, which why it takes time to put law together to make sure that it operates in terms of how you want to practice, which is to have that moment for victims and families to be able to tell the perpetrator the impact that it's had on them. And that's what, you know, the Justice Secretary, I'm sure, will be doing. And as I've said, he's committed to making sure the law's in place so that we get that balance right.
There have been calls this morning on this programme, and I think virtually every news programme, for the management team in charge of the hospital where these terrible crimes were committed, who were warned again and again and again by consultants that something bad was happening involving Lucy Letby. There have been calls for them to be charged with corporate manslaughter. The lead prosecution witness called for that on this programme. Would you agree? Would you agree that those suits should be brought into court themselves?
Well, look, I can't speak to the specifics of that charge, but what I will say is that the inquiry is really important here. It's really key that we get to an understanding of all the facts. I mean, I've read the reports like you have, and it's been an absolutely shocking case from start to finish. But what's really important is that we learn the right lessons so that we can make sure that this doesn't happen again. And in any setting, whether it's NHS or otherwise, that you don't get that closed culture, which is so dangerous, specifically for very vulnerable people. And when it comes to premature babies or children or young people in vulnerable circumstances, they are the most vulnerable members of society. And it's really important that when people raise concerns, there's enough accountability in the system that they're acted upon.
Yes, Claire. I mean, no one's going to disagree with what you said. The problem is that Dr. Dewey Evans, who you're probably aware is one of the critical parts of the prosecution's case, one of the reasons why we have the conviction that we've got, was speaking to us this morning and said, unfortunately, in his experience, which is some 30 years, this is very, very common. This happens again and again and again. And there needs to be a fundamental change in the approach of believing doctors and the power being in the hands of the doctors and medics in dealing with this, not the managers. So, and he's been part of many inquiries. So, of course, that inquiry must happen, but the lessons haven't been learned. So what are you going to do to see if we can make actual change this time?
Well, I think accountability has changed since the time Lucy Letby was committing these awful crimes. But like I said, I think the really important thing is the inquiry to check whether it is further accountability that's needed or other changes, and making sure that we learn those lessons as quickly as possible so that we can put everything in place to ensure this doesn't happen again.
Should this be a judicial inquiry? That's the other big question this morning. At the moment, it's not, which means that witnesses don't have to appear if they don't want to. If it was a judicial inquiry, they'd be compelled to give evidence in court if a judge summoned them. Do you think it should be a judicial inquiry?
Well, whenever incidents like this happen, there's always a debate about whether inquiry should be statutory or non-statutory, judicial or not, as you say. And there's different benefits. So if it's judiciary, then you can compel people. If it's non-statutory, non-judiciary, then it's often much quicker. And I think, on balance, it's right to get to the answers quickly in this case, so we can make sure that everything is in place that needs to be. I haven't heard of people saying that they wouldn't come forward. I think this has been such a shocking crime. I hope that everyone would come forward and give all the evidence that they need to make sure that this can't happen again.
I mean, the problem is trust, isn't it? You're Minister for Families and Children and Wellbeing, and trust has to be there at every level. Trust in the nurse you hand your precious bundle of life to care for, trust in the doctors to have the power to step in if they have concerns, trust in the hospital to make sure that the best care is happening. And at the moment, this morning, that's been shaken. What do you feel as Minister for Families, Children and Wellbeing you can do right now to begin to reinforce that?
Well, look, that's exactly what I worry about, all the expectant parents around the country. And firstly, I want to say they should feel assured that everyone in the NHS is there to serve them. This is such an unusual case. And yes, we must learn the lessons and we will do the inquiry and get to those answers, but I want people to feel confident in the NHS and also to understand that we will get to these answers as quickly as possible to make sure that this kind of thing can't ever happen again.
Well, look, you're the designated Minister of the day, which is why we've obviously concentrated on this. You're also here, this is one of the reasons you're out and about today, to talk about a change in policy in terms of landlords and allowing a certain type of work to take place in their rental properties. Just, I'm sorry to say briefly, can you tell us what it is you want to see happen?
Yes, so childcare is a really important issue to this government. We are doubling the amount that we're spending on childcare in the next couple of years. And the bit that I am focusing on today is childminders, because we've heard that 1 in 8 childminders are being barred from doing the jobs that they love, tremendous jobs which give great outcomes for children and also flexibility for parents because of property restrictions, whether that's because they're renting or otherwise. So I'm urging the property sector to work with me to ensure that we get exemptions for childminders alongside doing other things like making sure that they can get paid monthly and making sure that they can register quickly. So there's a bunch of things that we're doing, but the message I want to give you today is that childminders are really important. We want the property sector to work with us to allow them to operate.
Sounds like a good idea. Good luck with it. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.